I can remember back when I was competing in triathlons, everybody thought I was the healthiest person in the world, and so did I. I thought I was doing so much to improve my health as I'm guzzling Gatorade and pounding the goos and eating nothing but bananas and bagels, just a carb as I'm doing these races. And the night before, fueling up with pasta because that's what I'm supposed to do. I heard it from Tim Noakes himself. But boy, was I on a crash course for trouble. And a new paper now by Dr. Phil Maffetone himself, sort of a guru of even back then in the 80s and 90s of saying maybe we shouldn't be doing it this way, really points out the problems of being a very fit, highly trained athlete, but the risk of overtraining and how carbohydrates can play into that. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at dietdoctor.com, and I want to point out this paper called Athletes, Fit But Unhealthy, published in Sports Medicine. And it really brings to the forefront what we've seen so many times, whether it's Tim Noakes himself or Peter Attia or Sami Inkinen, some very public figures who have been at the peak of endurance physical activity, doing amazing physical accomplishments, and developing metabolic dysfunction, metabolic syndrome, metabolic disease that you would think would be impossible for somebody exercising so much. But not only is it not impossible, it's actually fairly common. And that's what Phil Maffetone points out in this paper. And he has a really interesting diagram that starts with the HPA axis, or the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and what is termed the sympathetic response. And then it goes in two different directions. And one direction is inappropriate volume of high intensity training or competition. So that's sort of the overtraining part of it that can lead to inflammation and reactive oxygen species and hormonal stress. But the other side of it goes to high glycemic, highly processed and refined foods, which is poor nutrition leads to hyperinsulinemia and can lead to increased inflammation. And these two come together to cause the metabolic substrate imbalance, as he calls it, that can lead to maladaptation and the overtraining syndrome. And I thought this was really interesting because I've heard for decades about overtraining. You're just doing too much physically. But this, for me at least, was the first time I saw in writing the connection of nutrition to overtraining. And whether it's connected or not, even by itself, like I said with those examples, it can lead, poor nutrition despite the training can lead to metabolic dysfunction and metabolic danger. So was I being healthy by competing in Ironman triathlons and guzzling the goo and the Gatorade and the bagels? No, that was far from healthy. I was improving my cardiorespiratory fitness. I was really helping myself psychologically, that's for sure, but I was likely damaging myself metabolically. And that's why I think it's so important to raise awareness of this, like Phil Maffetone is doing, that what you really want to be doing, if you can, is burning fat, not burning carbohydrates. You want to improve your fat oxidation and your ability to burn fat for fuel, because no matter how fit we are, we have plenty of fat stores that we can burn, and that's going to be the healthier version that's going to prevent the hyperinsulinemia and the metabolic dysfunction. And we can do that by reducing the carbohydrates. Doesn't mean you have to be keto, but to burn fat when you're doing these types of exercises, because you're burning so many calories. You're going to burn through your glucose and your glycogen, but you have to have trained yourself to be able to tap into those fat stores to be able to burn fat appropriately and efficiently so that you can sustain yourself in your training and your racing. And he has a couple really interesting quotes in here. Reducing refined carbohydrate content from an athlete's diet and replacing these calories with healthy natural carbohydrate and fat over prolonged periods can increase both lipid oxidation rates and various markers of metabolic health. I think that's important, so I want to unpack that. So reducing refined carbohydrates, right? He's not saying you have to get rid of all carbohydrates, but what do most athletes eat a lot of are refined carbohydrates and sugars to get that immediate energy. But reducing those refined carbohydrates and replacing them with healthy and more natural carbohydrates and with dietary fat over a prolonged period can improve your rate of burning fat, lipid oxidation, and improve your metabolic health. So I think that is a very profound statement that athletes need to be aware of. And the next statement, from a practical standpoint, the modification of the diet and or training programs as indicated can improve health while increasing fitness, potentially through the mechanisms discussed above. And that's the key, improving health while increasing fitness. And another interesting quote he had about inflammation: while acute inflammation is a normal response to exercise training and helps athletes recover and adapt, inappropriate training intensity, volume, or both, especially combined with a high glycemic and refined carbohydrate diet, can result in chronic inflammation and pain. So here, the concept that not all inflammation is bad. Acute inflammation from a heavy workout is probably a good thing. But the overtraining, the constantly doing that, and combining it with a potentially inflammatory diet with refined carbohydrates, that can then lead to this chronic inflammation. So I think that's a really interesting hypothesis that he has some references to support. But again, it's that combination of improper training and the high carbohydrates. So if you want to maybe improve your ability to train harder, maybe just lowering the refined carbohydrates can do it by itself, maybe, but certainly doing both is going to improve your health overall. And this is how he finishes it: for optimal performance, athletes must be fit and healthy. And I love that quote. Must be fit and healthy. And that sort of ties in, I guess you could say, a little bit to the previous video I just did about how people can be overweight but fit and have lower risk than people who are normal weight and not fit. So fitness makes a big difference. But if you can combine fitness with health, that's really the key to feeling good, performing well, and potentially to longevity. Of course, I say potentially because we don't have great evidence about longevity data in general. But such a great hypothesis. So trying to improve our fat oxidation, reducing the refined carbohydrates. So what does this look like practically? If you can train in a fasted state or train in a very low carb state, you can train your body to burn fat for fuel. So then when you're competing in your races, you can eat more complex carbohydrates and be tapping into your fat stores more efficiently. That's probably the better way. So if, Dr. Phil Maffetone, he's a pioneer in this. He's got a whole website and books about it. I hope to get him on a future episode of the Diet Doctor podcast to go into this a little bit more. So stay tuned for more information on this. So if you thought this was helpful, please give us a thumbs up and a subscribe. You'll get updates on all our videos here on DD News on YouTube. Thanks a lot, everybody. Be happy, be healthy, and be fit.